Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. The Christian religion is divided on issues of sexuality, not least the degree of acceptance and inclusion offered to gay men and women of faith. Amid the fierce theological arguments are stories of individuals torn between their faith and sexual orientation, like my guest today, Vicky Beeching, a popular Christian singer-songwriter turned public advocate for LGBT rights, whose remarkable story has seen her described as one of the most influential Christians of her generation. Has she found peace after years of turmoil? Vicky Beeching, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Just a decade ago, singing and songwriting were the pillars of your life. You built your life around that singing career. Do you still sing today?
I don't. It's very interesting. As I'm sure we'll get onto in our conversation, when I took the big step to come out as gay, many things changed. I lost a lot of things, and my music career was one of them.
And that was a choice, was it? You chose to consciously not sing anymore.
Well, it's interesting because I chose to come out and therefore lost my music career in the church, but then I had imagined that I would keep singing just for my own kind of personal, as an outlet creatively. But every time I picked up my guitar and played, it just gave me so many flashbacks to the work that I used to do, playing in these big American churches that would preach against same-sex marriage and LGBT people. And the correlation just felt so tight and strong that I actually really lost the desire for that creative outlet.
Because faith and your Christianity, your religion is going to be so much a part of this conversation. If you can tell me where you acquired your faith from, was it simply that your parents were very observant and that you inherited faith from them?
Faith has always been very real to me. I think when people talk about faith or religion, people might assume that it is more of a kind of a sterile belief system, some distant deity and a set of rules. But for me, it really grew out of a childhood curiosity of wondering where the world came from. As a very small child, I would just kind of stare up at the night sky, look at the stars, sort of think, how on earth did all of this get here? And I began to talk to God and believed that, he/she was up there. And my parents are very passionate Christians, so I was taken to church. And so I, very much took on board the Christian faith and felt like I had a real relationship with God.
When did you first begin to become aware that there was this tension within the religion you were a part of, but also within yourself, between that part of you that was very committed to the church and to the faith, and that other part of you which became increasingly aware of a sexual identity and orientation which didn't fit with what the church was teaching?
I think my first recollection of hearing about same-sex relationships was actually during a kind of kids version of church that we went to on Sundays. It's when the adults had their sermon, we would go into another room and have kids' church. And I remember they had these picture books that talked about different Bible stories, like Noah and the flood. And they had another one for the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a very interesting Bible story about God burning 2 cities to the ground. And traditionally it's thought to be because the cities were full of people who were gay. That's what is understood in church kind of teachings. And so I remember being told that the reason that these cities had been burned to the ground was homosexuality, I think we were told, but that we were too young to understand what it was, but it was something very bad. And so at a very young age, probably 5 or 6 years old, that really lodged in my brain. And I just sort of made a mental note, okay, whatever that is something very wrong. And then when I was 13, I realised I was gay. And so that sort of came back, and I remembered that it was something that God was apparently very much against.
Was it an impossible notion that you could have talked to anybody as a teenager about your growing awareness that you were a gay young woman?
Well, I had several options. One of them would have been school, but because of Section 28, as people in the UK know, the law that actually basically prohibited schools from teaching about same-sex relationships. We didn't have any education about LGBT issues at school, and so there wasn't anybody I could talk to there.
I mean, the most natural people to turn to, in some ways, would have been your parents, but that was impossible.
In theory,
was
I
it?
mean, my parents very much believe the teachings of the evangelical church, so I knew what they would have said and I knew what they thought, so it meant I just didn't feel comfortable, and obviously I wouldn't have felt comfortable at church. So, you know, home, church and school are people's main sort of avenues, aren't they? And I just didn't really feel able to talk to anybody in any of those.
Well, here we sit in a TV studio talking so openly, so clearly a great deal has changed in the course of the last 20 years. And you have written a book, Undivided, and the subtitle of it is Coming Out, Becoming Whole, and interestingly, Living Free from Shame.
Yeah.
And it's a theme that just courses through the book and through your conversation, this notion of how much shame you have had to live with for so long. And I'm just wondering what kind of a toll, when you look back on your teenage years, what kind of a toll it took on you?
Yeah, it's been vast, and I think that is partly why it's taken me so long. I didn't come out until I was 35, and I think undoing a lot of that damage has taken years. I think in terms of looking back at the impact of shame, I see a lot of mental health issues in my teenage years that I believe were the result of that: depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, just feeling like I couldn't imagine a future for myself because I wasn't able to walk the same pathway that all of my straight friends were, you know, where they were, you know, initially just dating in their teens. Obviously I wasn't able to do that, and then as I got older, went to university, I watched my friends begin pairing up, you know, getting engaged, starting to get married, have kids. And because I couldn't be in a relationship with someone of the same sex because of my job in the church and the views of my friends and family, I just couldn't imagine a way forward. So the toll was huge on my mental health.
And you sort of tried once or twice to reach out, even within the sort of religious framework and context, to people to tell them your truth. And you write so graphically about one particular instance which is stuck in my mind, this sort of, I guess you could almost call it an exorcism at a Christian camp in the countryside, where people were asked to come to the stage and share particular problems and issues that were so deep within them in a caring Christian community. Right. So you went forward, and I think you sort of whispered to one of the adults on the stage, I'm gay, I think I'm gay, I am gay. And they proceeded, and you write about it, you said, you know, there I was, stood frozen to the spot, my eyes clamped shut, my face flushed, as they continued to tell me that Satan and his demons must be gotten out of my mind, my heart, and my body. I knew that being gay was sinful. I'd never imagined it was caused by demons or the devil. So it seems to me this sort of treatment of you from people who are deeply religious themselves was actually making things much worse for you.
I mean, it honestly did, which is very sad. I think it's just a lesson for the church to learn now about people of all ages who, you know, need to be protected from this kind of treatment. So it was in kind of a charismatic evangelical church meeting, as we would call it in the church, kind of, you know, one that has quite lively music, and the sort of Christians who believe God still is at work today and can kind of heal people. And so somebody was on the stage saying that they used to be gay and they'd been prayed for and they were now straight. And then they asked if anybody wanted to come up and receive prayer for that. And so in front of 4,000 people, as a 16-year-old, feeling very shy and awkward, I managed to make my way to the front and then received prayer, which, like you say, turned into an exorcism. And it just created so much shame, I think, because I'd imagined being gay was sort of a psychological, emotional thing, not anything to do with dark forces. And
the devil.
You know, that's kind of what I was led to believe. And it's amazing what we'll believe when we're surrounded by people that tell us things in authority. You know, I was an intelligent kid, but I somehow took on board the fact that it was dark forces that were making me gay.
So, Vicky Beeching, the obvious and rather brutal question is, in the context of all of that and the very troubled mind that was giving you, why on earth did you first of all decide to go to a theological college which was training people for the priesthood or for careers in the church, and then to even sort of double down on that, decide to sign up to a record deal with a religious music group who wanted to make you a huge star in evangelical, conservative churches across America. Why?
It's a really interesting question, and I think looking back I do have a lot of regret, and that is something I think you can only look at in hindsight, you know, kind of maybe perhaps the way you wish you'd lived your life. But I think, to be honest, that decision really speaks of how important my faith has always been to me. Ever since I was about 13, around the same time as I realised I was gay, I realised that I wanted to dedicate my life to working for the church. And I thought about being ordained as a priest, but actually what appeared to be my gifting was writing religious music, so quite contemporary hymns and worship songs that people seem to really enjoy singing all around the UK. And
the sort of Christian soft rock that fills those mega churches in America.
Christian soft rock, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Well, I don't mean to sound in any way
No, you
judgmental.
are actually right. You are actually right, yes.
But you, listen, you even signed a contract with the recording company that wanted to turn you into a sort of Christian star in America, which had these moral clauses in it, which you honestly say in the book you knew, although they didn't specify lesbianism or homosexuality, you knew that would be the sort of quote-unquote immoral behaviour that would be unacceptable to the group you were signing on to. So in a funny sort of way, you were signing away your own life by going into this
but
career.
it just felt like a very cruel choice. So I had these two crucial parts of who I was. One of them was my orientation, you know, my desire for a partner and a home together and a family, and the other part was this sense of vocation, which is a very strong pull of its own, isn't it? A sense of kind of calling and mission. And I felt like my meaning for life was in serving God through the church in music. And that was a very important thing for me too. So choosing between the two felt almost impossible. And because my family, friends, livelihood, all were kind of on one side of the scale, and then my sexual orientation was on the other, honestly, the scale tipped in favour of just staying in the closet, because I felt like my whole world would just collapse if I spoke out about being gay.
But by staying in the closet, you were essentially shutting down your entire emotional life.
Yes, but I didn't realise that at the time. I was told by various Christians, not ones who knew about my sexuality because I wasn't talking about it, but they would say things like, oh, it doesn't matter if you're single because marriage isn't everything, the church can fill that gap, you know, there's such a lot of community in the church, you don't actually need a spouse and a partner. And so that was very much what I was taught, actually, just in general about marriage, because there are quite a lot of single women within the church.
There is something extraordinarily powerful about playing on a stage in front of so many people who think that you're fantastic, and maybe vanity was a part of this trade-off too. You just loved the skill you had and what it could bring you, and you made a sort of pact with yourself.
Well, the church doesn't really present it like that, and it never feels like that in a church setting. It's not like a rock concert. It's very much like you're there, a bit like a priest or a preacher, so you're sort of doing your ministry, as they would call it. And the meaning I found in it was really that sense that I was fulfilling my purpose. I felt like God wanted me to write these songs and share them with the church.
But how could you feel that when the ministers, the actual pastors and preachers that you were performing alongside, were preaching messages, particularly about sexuality, that ran entirely counter to your private identity and thoughts?
Well, the problem was I believed that being gay was wrong, and so I agreed with them.
Did you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think when something is programmed into you from such a young age, I mean, it took me till the age of 30 to come out because I had to unprogram my own brain and body and do a lot of study of the Bible, study of church history, and actually realise that it was okay. So I actually agreed with them the whole way through. So I didn't live a double life, I didn't have any relationships, I didn't have a private identity. I just had a sense that I was inherently very broken and very sinful, and that's why I had so much shame. And so I was kind of agreeing with their message that actually I shouldn't be in any relationships and I should get help to try and change, which is incredibly sad.
You've talked about the mental health issues and the depression. How bad did it get?
It got really bad, and when I came to write the book, I was faced with a decision. You know, how honest am I going to be in this book? And I decided I really would tell everything. And so I talk in the opening chapter about finding myself in my late 20s, standing on the London Underground, actually considering taking my own life because I was literally that despondent about the future. I was so isolated. I think I'd just, as you say, I'd basically locked myself into such a difficult situation. My entire livelihood, all those contracts, moving to the Bible Belt in America, not being able to talk about why I was so isolated and lonely. I just couldn't really see a way out. It was very frightening, and I'd got to the point where I was just so alone and so full of fear and shame inside that I just wanted it all to be over. So the book is it's very raw in that sense. It really does explain just how dark things got.
It is raw, and you can feel the pain in many of the pages, but I'm just wondering, given what a crisis you reached, how you got to a place where, as you say, in 2014, when you were 35, you actually found the courage, the strength, the determination, not just to declare to people around you that you were gay, but actually to make it something of a public moment. I mean, you spoke to a journalist. It ended up being on the front page of a British newspaper because you were, you know, it's quite a story. The notion of one of, you know, the Christian world's leading singer-songwriters declaring she was gay. How did you get from that girl, that young woman who almost killed herself on the London Underground, to the young woman who was prepared to speak out in that way?
It took a lot, and initially it was the breakdown of my mental health. So during my 20s I had a lot of anxiety and depression. Like I say, found myself at a really kind of suicidal point. But all of that somehow I just about seemed to keep one step ahead of. But the thing that I couldn't outrun in the end was my physical health. And I talk as well in the book about a sudden decline of my physical health. I was tired all the time, was exhausted, and suddenly I began to notice patches of white scarring on my skin. And I didn't think much of it, but I went to a dermatologist and he actually diagnosed it as an autoimmune disease. And he said it was called scleroderma. And then he also told me I needed chemotherapy to treat it. So it was a bombshell, really, and my life has kind of came to a crashing halt. Well,
the dealing with it, as I say, ended up with this front page newspaper, and it's very striking to me that it was headlined, you know, Vicky Beeching, Christian rock star, quote, "I'm gay and God loves me just the way I am." When that came out, were you really sure that God loved you just the way you were, or were you just fervently hoping that was the case? Because you told me that for a long time when you were younger, you actually believed that being homosexual was fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
So today, for example, do you truly believe that God loves you just the way you are?
Thankfully I do, at last. But I think the fact that it took me till I was 35 to come out hopefully highlights a lot of the mental work that had to go on for me to actually reassess those beliefs. So when I got diagnosed with scleroderma, I started the chemo, I had to leave America, come back to the UK and have the treatment. And that was when I decided I have to come out at some point. And that's when I began really rethinking the whole issue, revisiting what the Bible actually says with academic scholarship. And I realised actually that the verses I thought were prohibitive of same-sex relationships, I think we've just misunderstood them in the church. And so it took me a long time, you know, several years of study and prayer, but I really do believe that now, that God actually creates many of us to be LGBT, and that's who we're meant to be.
Thing is, many people who used to be sort of co-religionists of yours in those denominations that, you know, one could loosely describe as fairly sort of evangelical, quote-unquote fundamentalist in their Christian beliefs, very heavily based upon, you know, scripture and fairly literal translation or use of scripture, they now regard you as something of a traitor. They believe that you have found a path that is based upon lies and indeed, in a sense, a betrayal of Jesus Christ and his life and teachings.
Yeah, I think that's been the most crushing part. I knew that I would probably lose my music career, which I did. There was a huge boycott of my music, but I just hadn't expected quite the amount of vitriol and backlash as soon as I came out, and ever since, really, I've been receiving hate mail, death threats.
Why hadn't you expected it? Because you stood there for years in churches and listened to the sermons and know exactly what they think about homosexuality, so I'm surprised you were surprised.
I knew there would be some sort of response, but I think I hoped against hope that because it was me, and because they knew me and liked me and sang my songs, maybe there would be just a bit more compassion, or perhaps even that some churches would say, well, we know Vicky, we know her music, maybe we'll rethink this issue. I think part of me hoped that, and in a very small amount of cases that has happened. But for the most part, unfortunately, most churches just kind of slammed the door and told me I was choosing a life of sin, unfortunately.
Choosing a life of sin, and Pastor Scott Lively responded to your coming out by saying, I'm very sorry to hear that Vicky has given in to the lie that she is a homosexual, instead of, as she could have done, trying to overcome this profound challenge in her life. Another leading American sort of theologian of the evangelical movement, Robert Gagnon. He said that he could only condemn the inauthenticity of desires that contradict the handiwork of our Creator.
Right, that shows you what I'm up against and why it took me till I was 35.
Are you still a Christian?
Yes, but I think Christianity is quite a broad spectrum, and I think it's important that we don't let a very extreme wing of Christianity be thought to represent everybody. I'm actually doing a PhD at the moment in theology, so I'm very passionate about understanding the Bible in an academic way, and there are plenty of people who think that you can be gay and Christian, it's just part of the church doesn't.
Indeed, and there is now a fierce theological debate about homosexuality, and to a certain extent it's personalised around you. But let's leave aside theological debate. Let's talk what really matters: personal relationships. Your parents, are they fully accepting of you today?
My parents are amazing. They really have only wanted the best for me, and I think since I came out, it's been an opportunity for us to learn. I think it's interesting when people have been in the church their whole lives. It's very difficult for people to kind of change their mind on things. But my parents and also my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, different people, they're all from the same part of the church.
Which matters more, sorry to interrupt, we're all short of time, which matters more to you, the acceptance of your parents or the acceptance of the church?
I think both equally, really. I think I would just love to be accepted for who I am by everybody.
Do you crave acceptance from those of your community who've now walked away from you and described you as a complete sort of
I think that's
charlatan?
part of my problem, because I stay in conversation with them. I am gracious, I'm polite, I still love the church, I speak well of it, and I belong to it. And I think a lot of people in my shoes would just have jettisoned out and parachuted off and maybe become an atheist or, you know.
Why do you still love the church? Even in the Church of England, which within the gamut of different Christian denominations, many would regard the Church of England as one of the woolliest, most liberal, sort of most...
And yet their traditional teaching still is that same-sex relationships are sinful.
Forgive the intrusion, but I don't know if you're in a relationship at the moment.
Not at the moment.
But if you become in a relationship which is very serious and you want to get married, you can get married in the UK, but actually in the Church of England, as I understand it, you still can't have the full marriage ceremony in a church.
No.
So why do you want to be in that church?
Because I believe that it's better to stay inside and change the institution. I think if everybody like me left, there wouldn't be anybody left to fight for change. So it is very uncomfortable at times, especially at the moment, because there's a lot of infighting going on. But I think my influence is best served inside the Church of England, hopefully trying to make it a better place for people like me. And if I could sum up my goal, it's just that nobody would ever have to go through what I've been through again.
Throughout your life, you have clearly been a woman who has had to battle enormous amounts of anxiety, you say shame, terrible stresses. Are you at peace today?
I am, finally, but it's been a long time coming, and there's still, war wounds that I deal with. I still do suffer sometimes with anxiety and depression. I've been left with chronic fatigue syndrome, known as ME, as a kind of hangover, really, of all the stress and the autoimmune issues. So I'm still kind of limping along a little bit, but I'm finally able to be me. I'm able to be authentic. And I think that's just the biggest relief, that I don't have to double think before I say anything. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. I can finally just, write, broadcast, speak, all the different things I do now instead of my music career, and just be honest and be authentic and open. And I think that there's no better example of a human fully alive and Christian as well, living in love and peace than someone that can actually be themselves. So that's something that I'm very relieved that I finally get to do.
Vicky Beeching, thank you very much for joining me on Hard Talk. Thank you very much.